Okay, come on. Welcome to this webinar to celebrate Missouri's Mediation Month. We're lucky to have with us today 3 people to talk about landlord-tenant mediation. Joining us today are Debbie Bayless and Karen Slaughter from the Center for Conflict Resolution in Kansas City, and Stacy Johnson Cosby from the Kansas City Regional Housing Alliance. Okay, ladies, would you like to introduce yourself and your organization? Let's start with Stacy.
Well, thank you. My name is Stacy Johnson Cosby. I am a realtor of 34 years, licensed in Kansas and Missouri. I'm also a housing provider, and some people call them landlords. And my husband and I have owned rental properties for probably 27 years. And I'm also the president of the KC Regional Housing Alliance, a network of other housing providers representing the leaders of organizations that are property managers, investors, realtors, and other landlord type groups. And our goal is to speak with one voice for housing providers in our Kansas City area region.
Debbie?
Hi, my name is Debbie with the Center for Conflict Resolution, and we are a nonprofit in the Kansas City metro area. We've been around for about 21 years in various places. Currently are at 63rd and Paseo, and we do all kinds of different types of mediation and conflict resolution practices in connection to community, prisons and schools and all kinds of different areas where there's conflict or ways that people need to resolve their conflicts in a more peaceful and nonviolent way.
And I'm Karen Slaughter with the Center for Conflict Resolution as well. I, as Debbie mentioned, am also a mediator, but I work primarily or largely with our landlord-tenant pro se mediation cases in eviction court. And this gives us an opportunity to talk with both the landlord or housing provider and the tenant and find mutual opportunities for us to come to an agreement, for them to come to an agreement in a dignified way so that each of them receives what they need and are able to separate or continue their relationship in a better fashion.
So let's get started by talking about the changes that you have experienced in landlord-tenant disputes since the start of the COVID pandemic, approximately March 2020.
So what I've seen has been somewhat of a desperation. There's a desperation both on the part of the tenant and of the housing provider. In many cases, the housing provider has gotten engaged in rental property to supplement their retirement income. And at this point, because of the lack of work and the number of individuals who are not able to make ends meet, that is being threatened. And in some cases, the individuals who are the housing providers are having to dip into savings to retain the properties that they have purchased. And in other cases, there's no savings to dip into, so they too are being threatened with the loss of the property because they can't make the payment and the renter hasn't the ability to make the payment either. So there's a desperation on both sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one thing I've noticed also besides that is that just a simple agreement on a payment plan hasn't been able to be as easy to reach because there's no payment to be made if there's no income. And so connecting people to resources is something that we've definitely gotten more involved in as a resource for not us providing the resources or the funding, but connecting people to the federal funding that may be available for landlords as well as tenants.
And if I can say something too about, you mentioned the payment plan. For housing providers, there may be a reluctance to go into mediation because the process is unknown or foreign to us for the most part, because our relief normally comes in court and going to eviction court. So short of an eviction, what many think, and especially about something that doesn't get them that immediate relief that an eviction does, is that they've been there before with the renter making, promises or making plans to pay. And so by the time it gets to court, to eviction court, there may have been 4, 5 broken agreements. And so then the trust on the housing provider's side is probably really low, because they're thinking, we've been here, we've done this before. And so like Debbie said, I think it is great now that we have rental assistance, which is a resource that can make the difference and can be different.
Mm-hmm. And we will show a slide of some of the resources you've given to us at the end of the broadcast. So thanks for bringing that up. Well, one question that comes up a lot is, what is there to talk about? People may assume that eviction is just an open and shut case. Either you pay the rent or you're out. What kind of issues do you find exist between landlords and tenants that are amenable to resolution through mediation?
Well, I think part of it, Stacy spoke to, there have been some broken promises. And quite frankly, when we are faced with a challenge, a financial challenge, we may make the promise of a payment from a stimulus check or an income tax refund. But in addition to the rent, there are other bills and obligations that are also building up. So at the time those funds are received, the tenant oftentimes has not enough funds still to address all the ills or all the accounts that need to be addressed. What mediation allows them to do is to recognize that that's still a challenge, that one check is not going to be the cure-all, and to think through a process or a option that is doable for them, and at the same time allow the housing provider to have a glimpse into the challenge that the tenant is facing, and come to an agreement that he or she recognizes is going to be positive for the tenant and will more aptly ensure that they're going to receive some payment or a payment that is defined in this particular agreement.
And if I can say from the housing provider perspective, and I talked to one of my peers about this and about doing this, and what he says is that it is pretty much black and white. It is cut and dry, that there is a contract, and the contract says on the 1st of the month, rent is due. And so from a business perspective, which is what we are, we're small businesses, and as entrepreneurs, we're operating already on really tight margins. And so at the end that the renter may have had, other issues in their lives, that's interesting, but the bottom line is rent is due. And when you are entering into a mediation, the main thing I think that would be most important is how are you going to pay it? Understanding that they've had other issues in their lives. Maybe they're sick, a kid's sick, a car problem, lost a job. When anyone has like other bills, when you have a credit card bill due or a car payment, student loan, you don't, get to go to mediation and tell them, hey, I have other life issues, please overlook them. And so I think that's the thing that's unique about this situation. But still, we are business people. What's going on in their lives is, fine. But if you come to the mediation with a solution, which means there's a source of money, maybe that's new and different, to get the rent paid. Our ultimate goal is getting revenue into our business so we can take care of our family. So the mediation should be geared around actual resources that can get the rent paid, black and white. It's a contract, and let's, honor the contract.
I think one thing that mediation does also allow is to personalize the situation. So, even if there's a judgment issued against someone, that doesn't guarantee that the money is available. But sometimes in mediation, understanding each other's perspectives and needs in connection to, making bills, paying bills and such, then the timeline can be discussed, the nuances of what that person's abilities to pay and what kind of what that would look like, or even a move out date that saves the housing provider as well as the tenant stress and maybe additional costs if they can agree on a move out date, if that's where things end up, or how's it going to, how can they work together to move forward, staying in the landlord tenant or housing provider tenant relationship. And so that mediation gets to the personal aspects of what's going on, even though it is a contract. How can you honor that contract with the nuances of what's going on in that person's life? Gives the voice to both those that are present a chance to reach something that is workable, and the outcome then can be a win-win for everyone. So, yeah.
So what kind of advice would you give to a housing provider or to a tenant about addressing these issues when they can see that things are going the wrong way and there may be an eviction in their future?
I would say the first step is communication, absolute communication. They should reach out to the provider and explain the situation as it exists currently, and maybe what they foresee happening in the near future, so that they can begin to develop an agreement that would be suitable for the provider and one that they can live up to.
And I think trust is going to be important as well. And it happens all the time. Life happens, and so we're in a business that we know that you know, someone may have a problem paying rent one month, or maybe a few days late, or they can pay half of it this month and the other half next month to catch up. We realize that, and that we're, you know, dealing with people with, you know, real life situations. But it's a matter of trust, and I 100% agree with Karen that it's about communication. If you know that you're going to miss a rent payment, or you're going to be late, a call, a text, or whatever your method of communicating is ideal, instead of letting the date or the deadline go by without saying anything, because then we're thinking, okay, we're thinking the worst and you know what's going on. So if you outline a plan and say, hey, I'm going to be late and I'm going to pay on this day, and then when that day comes, you pay. And so that way, when something happens again, there's some trust there that we know that you'll keep your word when something happens. And so I think communication is just very, very, very critical to a good relationship, no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think just the idea of communication, even if there's changes from recently, there did a case on over the phone with a housing provider and their tenant, and there had been changes in management, and so just making sure who do I send my check to, and all those kind of things, besides the things that Ms. Johnson Cosby and Ms. Slaughter already mentioned, just communicating all kinds of changes from everyone's, you know, so that clear line of communication is always there, so that anything can be addressed as soon as possible, so there's not the confusion and, well, I don't know who to pay, so I'm just not going to pay, and then you get behind and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
I know that sometimes people are afraid to communicate because they think they're going to get yelled at or they're going to be judgmental. So if someone's afraid to individually contact the other party, what would you suggest?
I don't think you can be. That delays the problem. If you're going to have a problem with a car loan or a mortgage loan, we're creditors. And so there's no reason to be fear. We're adults. It's a professional relationship. If it's a text message, if you don't want to have the conversation, maybe it's a text message, an email, or a written note by mail, you must communicate. And if the interactions, what you're worried about, put it in writing. But the important thing is just to make sure that the other party, either side, because they could be coming from a housing provider with something negative to say, and they don't want to talk to the tenant about it or whatever. If nothing else, put it in writing. But communication, I mean, you must make the communication. You just must.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing is mediators are also a resource. So calling Center for Conflict Resolution if you are concerned about, you know, or worried, processing with one of our impartial mediators about what is going on, then coming up with an action plan. Our first recommendation normally is, here's some things, here's what we've heard you talk about, here's how you can talk to your housing provider, and then we encourage them to do that as the first step. If they're still unsure and concerned, then we will be the go-between and set up a mediation for parties to be able to communicate with a mediator there to make sure that the process is done in a respectful way and that everyone's voice is heard and balanced. And so mediators are there as a resource if you do have the concerns or worried about that communication. So.
And we've actually had that from both the providers and the tenant. And Debbie's absolutely right. Sometimes it's just having that initial conversation with someone where you're able to share what your concerns are, even what your concern is about the response you may get for what you're sharing. Sometimes when you've had that opportunity to talk through it, understand the pros and cons of everything, we often check back with the client while we're waiting to hear from them, or they often call us back and say, okay, I think everything's going to be all right now, and we can close our file on the situation. And it's been their ability to talk through what was going on that's allowed them to have an open and frank dialogue with the other individual.
Right.
So let's say that a legal proceeding does get filed. What is the use of mediation once a suit is filed?
There have been cases that I've worked on in which really the relationship between the tenant and the provider has been a very positive one, but at this point there's just no other options. The tenant really does need to leave for their own benefit and for the benefit of the provider. And in those instances, when we've had an opportunity to talk, there have been agreements that have resulted in the eviction not being filed or being dismissed by the housing provider, an agreed upon date for possession. Just a number of things have happened as a result of actually having the ability to mediate, even though the trial has, or the case has been filed.
Okay, we're going to move on to talk about some of those resources that are available, hopefully. Here we go. The Attorney General has a handbook on landlord-tenant practices in the law. And also, we've listed both of your organizations there. Would you talk a little bit with us about the other resources that are available?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk just really quickly. As housing providers, we looked around and we saw that the government that had access to the funding, that they weren't necessarily the best at getting the word out. And so we put together a virtual event where we said that there's information out here. We need to reach people where they normally don't get reached. And we did an event with the United Way of Greater Kansas City. And so you'll see United Way on there at 211. And it's actually true anywhere in the country. If you have a United Way, you dial 211. And whatever help you need, whether it's food, shelter, clothing, counseling, and in this particular case, rental and utility assistance, by calling the 211 number, they will at least get you in and tell you where to go to get the help. And because they'll have various organizations they work with, and they'll point you in the right direction. And then the mohousingresources.com is another one for the state of Missouri to help with the $400 million that they have. You start the application process there. And if I could say just really quickly, either party can start the application process, whether it's the housing provider or the renter. And then once you go on the portal and you get it started, the other party, once you complete your application, the other party will get a notice that they need to complete theirs. There are some issues with the process, and I think they're working them out. We're definitely sharing what we're running into, but that's what we have for now. And I think they're always in the process of fine tuning it. And we have a lot of them on our website, the KCRegionalHousingAlliance.org website, as well as the recording of the event that we just did that had the executive director of the state of Kansas program, state of Missouri, United Way, and the city of Kansas City. That recording is on our website if someone wanted to go back and hear details.
Thank you, Stacy. And I'm not going to reiterate much of what she's already said. She's absolutely correct. It is great that in these Missouri housing resources that both the landlord and the tenant can initiate the action that sometimes helps the process along. The Casey Healthy Home Program is one that's listed, and primarily that's someplace you would call if you've got some maintenance and or repair issues that you feel you need some support with or assistance. The Emergency Rental Assistance Program is also from the Department of Treasury, and all the residents of Kansas City, Missouri are entitled to be, are eligible to be involved there. So you can find all this information on the Kansas City, Missouri's website, Department's Neighborhood Housing and Services. So, yeah, I think that's about all of them.
Can I add to, Karen, you said the healthy homes, and so that's through our Kansas City Health Department. I think it would be important just for people to know that that's kind of a last resort. If you've made an attempt, if there's some kind of safety or sanitary or health related issue in your home, and that you've reached out to your housing provider, and if they're just not responsive to it, that's where you go to the health department through the Healthy Homes program. And if only if your housing provider hasn't done it and you've given them ample opportunity, it's not a first step, but going to the housing provider is the first step. And if you make the call there, I think they do ask if you've already tried to work it out, and they'll send you back if not. But that is a great opportunity to get a housing provider to perform, to make a repair if they've resisted and just haven't done it, and it's health and safety related.
Yeah. And not listed on here is also the Heartland Center for Jobs and Freedom, as well as the Legal Aid of Western Missouri, that are also resources if you end up in court or have legal proceedings or need legal advice in connection to a landlord-tenant case in court. So you can Google them and find their information real easy. So.
All right. And I would say if you want some general information about mediation, look at the Association of Missouri Mediators website, which is momediators.org. And if you have questions about mediation services in the Kansas City area, Debbie, I'm sure they can call the Center for Conflict Resolution. Would that be right?
Definitely. Yeah, we're here Monday through Friday, 9 to 4. You can access us or go to our website, www.ccrkc.org, and connect with us that way.
Well, I want to thank all of our panelists today for talking about the landlord-tenant mediation issue, as we call it, housing provider issues. This is an important issue now and in the days ahead as we try to get back to the new normal. So thanks very much for joining us today. And we look forward to talking with you again in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for having us.
Mm-hmm.